My next guest was nominated for an Oscar for his role as Lieutenant Dan in the 1994 blockbuster Forrest Gump. He's an Emmy winner, a family man, musician, and philanthropist working on behalf of our nation's fighting men and women. He's also the author of a brand new memoir, Grateful American, a journey from self to service. Please welcome back to the program, Gary Sinise. Welcome back, Gary.
Good
Great to
back.
see you, as always.
Thank you.
And to see you on our turf here. Why do you subtitle the book A Journey from Self to Service?
Well, I didn't know what the book was going to be called when I started to write it, but as I started to pour through it, these recurring themes started to come out: gratitude, appreciation, and I realized that this memoir kind of tracked my life through the time where I was focused on this singular sort of acting thing that I was doing and building a theater company and, the things that were around my small world, and that it evolved into this broader mission story of service to others, which I'm very much involved in now because of my foundation, the Gary Sinise Foundation, and everything. So it really is. That's exactly what the book is. I am a grateful American, and it is a journey following this road from kind of a self-focus to a broader service focus.
You open the book and you title the prologue "Stunned," and it's about a seminal event that happened about 25 years ago that confirmed you in what's become your life's mission, your work. Tell me about that moment.
Yeah, I wanted to start the book with something and then kind of travel back. So I started with a kind of a pivotal moment, an important moment that sort of really stunned me in a way when I walked in to the Disabled American Veterans National Convention 25 years ago this summer. And they had seen Forrest Gump. It had just come out about a month before, and they'd seen Lieutenant Dan. And this is an organization that advocates for, they might have 2 million members that are all wounded veterans. And they invited me to their national convention. I walked in, and I was so emotional to receive their acknowledgement. They wanted to acknowledge me for playing a disabled veteran in what they consider to be a positive way. And 2,000 wounded veterans cheering you on, that was very emotional. I never forgot it.
You talk in the book also about your grandfather's service. You take us way back in the book. And you had family who were veterans, your wife's family as well. Tell me a sense of how that laid the groundwork for this concern and heart you have for military men and women and their families.
Well, it's funny, when I was a kid, my dad was in the Navy in the early 50s, and I was born in 55. He got out of the Navy in 55. I was conceived here at Anacostia on the naval base there, and that's where my dad was stationed. He was working in the film lab as a photo mate, is what they called him. And that's where he learned the film business. He moved, my mom went back, she left, she was pregnant, she went back to Chicago, said, I'm gonna have the baby there. He got out of the Navy about a week after I was born. And then he went into the film business in Chicago, started working in the film business. His dad had served in World War I, and his 2 older brothers served in World War II. So I've got this family on my side of the family of veterans, but I never really talked to them too much about their service when I was a young kid. It was really when I met my wife, and she introduced me to her brothers who had served in Vietnam in the U.S. Army. Her sister was in the Army. Her sister married a Vietnam veteran who was in the Army for 22 years, combat medic in Vietnam. They were the ones that sort of started to talk to me about military service and what it was like to be a Vietnam veteran, serve in the jungles, and then come home to a nation that really didn't treat them very well. And they had to kind of recline into the shadows a bit. I felt very badly for our Vietnam veterans. And so in the early 80s, I just started to do some things in Chicago to support them in different ways. And that sort of planted the seeds a little bit for what would happen in the 90s when I had the opportunity to audition for Forrest Gump and then play a Vietnam veteran. I very much wanted to do that because of the military veterans in my own family. And that led me to start working with our wounded and And it all turned. There was a turning point. There's a chapter in the book called Turning Point,
Right.
which is the September 11th attack. That was a real turning point for me, and I started moving into the service work that I haven't stopped.
No, it arrested people who were not there at the time. Don't remember what that moment did to the entire country. I mean, it was a shock to the whole system of the country.
No
but
question.
to those who were who had first responders in their family or were in any way involved with the victims of 9/11 or the New York scene, it became very real. The threat, the danger, and how fragile the freedom we took for granted was.
I write about that in the book, the fear that I had after that event. I mean, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
You know, to watch those buildings come down, watch people fall from those buildings, watch, you know, what was happening in the Pentagon and Shanksville and all and then remember shortly after that, all of a sudden anthrax is floating through the mail and everything. I mean, it was crazy. It was a very paranoid time. Everybody was on edge.
Yeah.
And I was on edge, and my heart was broken. I just wanted to do something. And I remember, I think I told you this one time.
Yeah.
Friday after the Tuesday of September 11th was a national day of prayer. George Bush said, everybody, we need to do something together as a country. I want Friday to be a national day of prayer. The churches were packed across the country. I went to our little church, little Catholic church, and there was no room to sit. I mean, I was standing against the wall with my family. Every space was filled. And I remember coming out of that feeling that, you know, I mean, it was comforting, but I needed to do something beyond that. And I heard this calling, this message that came to me about service and the healing power of service work. And that made a lot of sense to me. So I started raising my hand, you know, for the USO and, you know, what can I do for your military charity? Can I come and raise money for you? Can I draw some attention to you? Do some PSAs, whatever it is. Play concerts for the troops.
Yeah.
And it just started to go like this. And there's a period in that service history where you look at it and it's like I was gone every weekend doing something. And I was shooting a television show at the same time.
Yeah.
So it was a crazy period, but I was getting so much out of making an impact by letting people know that I cared about them and I appreciated them. And the war got worse, remember. There was a time where Walter Reed was just filled to the gills with wounded, and they didn't know where to put them. There were so many. And during that period of time, I was going to the hospitals all the time, meeting a lot of the families of our wounded, meeting our wounded service members, trying to come up with some ideas in ways to help them. And so I started raising money. I started getting into home building, where we would build specially adapted homes for our wounded.
Incredible.
And it all manifested itself into the creation of the Gary Sinise Foundation, which is toward the end of the book. You see the service journey into this full-time nonprofit that is devoted to serve and honor the needs of our military men and women and first responders. And we're getting great things done at the Gary Sinise Foundation.
No, I've seen it up close. And I want to talk about it in a moment. I want to, you get into your career as well, and I want to back up a little bit. In high school, and this I didn't know, in high school, you were not exactly the straight arrow that people think you are today, Gary Sinise. I mean, you were doing pot, you were selling it, a little scrape with the law after you signed on to be in West Side Story. What happened there? Where did this acting bug come from during that period?
Well, I had a lot of trouble as a kid. I never learned properly, I don't think, how to read and write. I mean, it's just, I've gotten better over the years.
Yes,
Obviously,
you have.
I wrote a book.
You've written a book now.
My high school teacher is amazed. You know, this kid wrote a book. That's incredible. You could put words together.
You see that? They make sense.
And when she first met me, I was just bumbling around, and you know, I was having trouble. I tell this story in the book where we moved from town to town a little bit, right in those years where you're developing a lot of friends and you're making friends, and then all of a sudden we uprooted and moved, and I had to make new friends, and that was a struggle. I played in rock bands. I got into trouble with a lot of things that I write about a little bit in the book because I do hope that somebody who might be going through a similar thing can see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and if you can turn yourself around. And I was lucky. In some ways, I don't know. I happened to be standing in a hallway, and this drama teacher walked down the hall when I was a sophomore in high school, and she told me to come and audition for West Side Story because I looked like a gang member, and she thought I'd be good in the show. And so I did. I went and auditioned, and I got in the show. And all of a sudden I discovered here's this aimless kid who's really, really troubled, having a lot of trouble adjusting. And all of a sudden I found this community of kids that I loved, and I just loved doing the play, and that's all I wanted to do. So I just auditioned for every play I could after that. Oh. And as soon as I got out of high school, I started a theater. I wanted to keep doing it.
Now, not any theater. You start the Steppenwolf Theater Company, which is now this iconic institution in Chicago. But
we were kids.
Yeah, in the beginning, it's you and Laurie Metcalf and John Malkovich. You're pals, and you're doing these shows together. What was it like in those early years? I mean, you all were learning at the same time, I imagine.
Yeah, in West Side Story.
And your wife, Maura, who was also
she
a part
was
of it.
An early member, 1976. In West Side Story, the guy who was playing Tony, the lead. I was one of the chorus guys. Yeah. I was a shark.
Pepe.
Yeah, Pepe the shark. And the guy who was playing the lead was Jeff Perry. And Jeff and I became best friends. And he was very different than me. He was a guy who carried a million books around, and he had glasses and read Chekhov and Stanislavski and stuff. I didn't know what any of that was. And I was just a rock and roll kid, but we really connected and we hit it off. And after high school, I just wanted to keep doing plays. So I started this little company with some of the high school kids. And Jeff had gone off to college to Illinois State University, and I told him about this. And so for his summer break, he came up to do a play with this little community company, a play by Tom Stoppard called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And he had made very good friends with another guy at ISU named Terry Kenny, who was another great actor. So he said, I'll bring Terry with me, and he'll be in it too. And so Terry came up, and the three of us really bonded during that experience. And we said, when you guys get out of college, we're going to pick this up again and do something with it. So a couple years later, they get out of college, and we find a space in the basement of a closed-down Catholic school. I went to the priest, and I said, I'm a little kid. Can we have your basement and put on some plays? And he said, sure. And, it was closed down. They weren't doing anything with us. He said he'd give it to us for $1 a year, for just a write-off. And so we built an 88-seat theater in this basement of a Catholic school in Highland Park, Illinois. And we recruited 6 more people, and Laurie Metcalf, Moira Harris, John Malkovich, Alan Wilder, H.E. Bacchus, and Nancy Evans. And we became the original 9 members of Steppenwolf. And from there, it just kept growing and growing and growing. Then we moved into the city of Chicago and built our own building, and now we're about to break ground on another building. And it's 45 years old now, that theater.
Unbelievable. Did you ever expect Lieutenant Dan to do what it's done, and why has it resonated in the way it has all these years later? I mean, generations now, we're talking about multiple generations now, that see you as Lieutenant Dan, and that gives you a certain credibility in addition to your work in the veteran community.
I don't know. I mean, you can think of a few movies that are constantly, you see them every year. They're always on television. It's a Wonderful Life. It's on every year, and new generations watch it. There's a few of them. Forrest Gump seems like it's on television all the time. Somebody is always texting me, hey, I'm watching Gump on TV right now. And it seems like it's never quite left the consciousness in some way. So new generations of kids are seeing Forrest Gump. I'll go and play for these concerts on military bases. There'll be 5,000 people out there. They're all screaming Lieutenant Dan at me, and I'll ask them, how many people here have seen Forrest Gump? And everybody cheers. And then I'll say, is there anybody over 10 who hasn't seen that movie? And it's very quiet. Nobody said it. People, I don't know if they're just embarrassed or what, but it seems like everybody's seen the film, and so it's always there. When I started going out for the troops, I hadn't had CSI New York yet, so I wasn't on television every week, and I had done some movies, but I was still kind of the guy, you know, the guy who played this guy and the guy who played that guy. People didn't know my name, but they knew Lieutenant Dan, and they recognized me from that. That's why I named my band after the character.
Yeah.
I figured, well, if they don't know my name, they'll know Lieutenant.
They'll know Lieutenant Dan, or they'll figure it out, and they have. Tell me, when I covered the Snowball Express this past Christmas, it blew me away. I have to tell you, it's not at all what I expected to see. I thought we'd have a bunch of kids having a good time at Disney World, but it really is. It's a therapeutic moment. You tried to explain it, but you have to experience it and see it. And what goes through your mind when you see these people discovering each other in their shared pain, and in the pain that they alone understand, these families of veterans who've lost their lives? And what do you say to them?
Well, it's humbling, you know. And it's moving, and I just embrace them and let them know that I love them and that I care about them and that they're not alone. That's the thing about this particular event. When we bring all the kids together and the families, these are kids that live all over the country in little towns or wherever it is. They might be the only military family in that town, and they lost their mom or their dad in military service, and that child is going through something that none of the other kids are going through.
Right.
But when they come together with this event that we do every year for these children, and they meet all these over 1,000 other kids that have all gone through this grieving of losing, you know, a mom or a dad in military service, they really feel like they're in a community, like they're in a family, like they're not alone, and they make lasting friendships. I mean, these kids give each other their numbers, and then they go off to the little towns and they stay in touch with each other.
And they meet up the following year.
Oh, it's a network of friends that are made.
I'm going to show people this little clip of video that your foundation released this week. It went viral, and it is people thanking you, being grateful for your work. Watch this.
Thanks, Lieutenant Dan. Just want to thank you
for everything that you do.
And your foundation helped me and my family recover from the devastating Tubbs fire. Not only me and my family, but also hundreds of other firefighters.
Give me a reaction to that when you saw all those people thanking you.
Well, first it was a shock because I was surprised by it. My team kind of pulled a fast one on me, and they were sneaking around behind my back, like getting everybody to send in videos, and they were putting it all together, and they had it perfectly planned to show it to me on the day that my book launched. And so we're on this book tour, and you know, we're in the hotel room. We're about to leave to go do some more interviews, and they. You know, I'm like in a hurry and everything. They made me sit down.
We need you to watch this.
Yeah, I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? So they made me watch it, and the first one up is Jay Leno, and he starts talking to Gary. Hey, Gary. You know, I'm like, what's this? And then Ron Howard comes on, and then another, and it keeps going on. And there are first responders there, and there are military folks from around the country and overseas, and there are Gold Star children, and some of our wounded that we've done houses for. Yeah. And I'm thinking about it, and I get choked up just thinking about it, because it was very, very touching and very moving and overwhelming. I mean,
yeah, no, it was a beautiful.
Just to see that people did that for me. I mean, I'm a grateful American.
Well, and people are grateful for you. I mean, the response I saw on social media was unbelievable. I got to ask you this before I let you go, because you talk about it in the book. It seems as if, and you told me moments ago, this is really a calling from God for you, and that's how you see it, this work you're doing.
I feel called to service for sure. And there were these key moments along the way, you know. And I can, I talk about that a little in the book, that moment where our priest, on the Friday after September 11th attacks, everybody is just in so much pain. You know,
Yeah.
people are just crying through every day.
Yep.
You know, recalling the images that we all saw on television and the things that are happening. Everybody was fearful, and I remember the priest getting up, and the first thing he said was, "This was a tough week," and he was right on the money. You know, everybody. It was a tough week for everybody.
Yeah.
It was a tough week for me, and it continued to be tough. And I continued to be in pain. And something I got out of that homily that day was that service is a great healer. Serving others is a great healer, and we should all pull together to do something positive for somebody else to help them through this terrible time. And having veterans in my family, and having been involved with the DAV and the disabled veterans and everything, and remembering what it was like for our Vietnam veterans to go off to war and then come back and not have services provided for them, not have the country embrace them and
Right.
welcome them home. They didn't even get a welcome home. And then seeing our deploying troops go to Afghanistan and Iraq and watching our nation start to divide itself in whether they supported the war or not, I felt terrible for our deploying service members, and I knew that was where my calling was going to be. I was going to be called to do this service work, to help them through this difficult time of deploying to the war zone in reaction to September 11th. And once I started, the healing began, and I could see the impact I was making, and I wanted to embrace every family member, every person that was deploying, every first responder that I could.
What's on the horizon for the foundation now? What's the next thing?
The foundation is growing. We're expanding our impact and our reach. I brought in some new team members that are helping lead the way. I mean, I put my acting career on hold. The last thing I did was December of 2016. So it's over 2 years that I've just poured myself into this work. And I think probably I've only worked 3.5 out of the last 8 years. And the rest of the time has been focused on this mission of building this foundation in hopes that we could create a lasting, reliable resource for the American people who want to support our defenders. If you go to GarySiniseFoundation.org, you can learn a ton of things about the great programs we have at the foundation and the people that we're impacting.